Welcome to the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus webinar, hosted by the caucus's Nutrient Management Task Force. Wisconsin Senator Andre Jacques is our chair of the Task Force of Nutrient Management, and he will be today's moderator. Senator?
Thank you, Carolyn. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to this meeting of the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Legislative Caucus. This slide, it provides a reminder of all the ways that you can ask a question. We encourage robust participation and discussion because that is how we all learn best. And for this webinar, we have reserved 90 minutes so that we can have plenty of dialogue and questions. And please note that, like all of our meetings, this session is being recorded, and the video will be posted on our website so that anyone can access it later. And this is the final webinar in our series highlighting the work of our task force on nutrient management. This task force is made up of members from each of the Great Lakes states and provinces. These members have put in many hours individually and collectively to address the issue of nutrient inflow into the Great Lakes. Appreciate the efforts of our members, and we do have another meeting coming up on June 4th that Carolyn will let all of you know about, but we always welcome new members. And I am sure that you will be hearing more from our members about this important issue in each of your own states and chambers. Today, we are going to be hearing from the staff of the Great Lakes Commission about a new effort called Blue Accounting. Blue Accounting is an information service to track the region's progress toward shared goals for the Great Lakes, maintained by the Great Lakes Commission. Information developed through Blue Accounting is intended to help elected and appointed officials make sure that policies and programs are effective at protecting the largest fresh surface water system on Earth. The Great Lakes Commission's Erica Jensen will kick us off today. Erica is the interim executive director of the Great Lakes Commission. She has been at the Great Lakes Commission for 14 years and continues to lead the Commission's Aquatic Invasive Species Program, where she coordinates the Great Lakes Panel on Aquatic Nuisance Species and supports the Invasive Mussel and Great Lakes Phragmites collaboratives. Many of us have already met and worked with Great Lakes Commission Program Manager Nicole Zaccarda. Nicole has been an advisor to the Burkholz Policy Institute as well as our task force, and she leads the Commission's water quality and water infrastructure work and has become the Commission's point person for development of the Blue Accounting Information Service. Eric Brown, the Commissioner's Senior Advisor for External Relations, will moderate our discussion time. Eric works with elected officials to enhance collaboration among Great Lakes policymakers and stakeholders. Appreciate the members that have worked with the Great Lakes Commission as we've been trying to fine-tune the Blue Accounting feature, and it's just fantastic work from the entire team at the Great Lakes Commission. Laura, Carolyn, Jenny will be tracking questions in the chat box and raised hands, and that will keep us on track. So with that, we will go to Erica Jensen.
Let me first take myself off mute before I say thank you, Senator Jacques and Carolyn, for inviting us back this morning to continue our conversation about the Great Lakes Blue Accounting Initiative. We certainly appreciate the ongoing partnership with the Legislative Caucus, both broadly and specifically on the Burkholz Institute and task force efforts, as well as your insights and feedback on our Blue Accounting Initiative. The valuable feedback we've gotten from this group and your members have really helped shape what Blue Accounting is becoming going forward. And so again, thank you for your feedback and for having us here this morning. I will present a few opening slides just as a refresher about quickly on where we've been and how that sets us up for where we're going. And then I will hand it off to Nicole to give you a preview about where Blue Accounting is heading and what that's starting to look like. So next slide, Nicole. And I just went over that, so next slide, thanks. So just briefly, this is a short timeline of our Blue Accounting Initiative. As a refresher, in 2013, the Great Lakes governors and the Premier of Ontario called for a smarter and more comprehensive approach to monitoring Great Lakes water resources. And in response, the Great Lakes Commission led a work group to develop a proposal and report for the adoption of a Great Lakes Blue Accounting process. And that report actually led to Blue Accounting being officially launched in 2015 in partnership between the Great Lakes Commission and the Nature Conservancy. So following the release of the Blue Accounting report, there was general support for the concepts and process presented, but there were a lot of questions around what that would actually look like in practice. So that 5-year effort between 2015 and 2020 really focused on how we turn this concept into a functioning, useful service for the region. And we did that across a range of issues. And so Blue Accounting over those pilot process sought to measure progress on issues related to desired environmental, economic, and social outcomes for the Great Lakes region. And so we learned a lot from that 5-year pilot process, and what we're doing builds on those lessons learned and the support and work of a variety of partners and dedicated stakeholders over the last 5 years. So one of the first things that we started to do as an outcome of the pilot process is that we realized Blue Accounting should be owned by the Great Lakes Commission, and it should be one of the myriad of services we provide to the region. And that the Commission's unique position in the region means that we're uniquely suited to steward this work over the long term. So in 2019, the Commission actually passed a resolution formally adopting Blue Accounting principles and committing our agency to moving forward with Blue Accounting over the long term. This also established our board of directors as the steering committee. And since the passage of that resolution up through today, we've been working on that transition in addition to updating and refining the initiative to what it will look like for this long-term sustained phase. Next slide, please. One of the things we did as we prepared to make this transition and launch into the longer term phase was undertake an effort to reflect on our work and identify the key lessons learned that would inform how the Commission manages Blue Accounting in the future. So this included a number of parallel efforts, including a third-party evaluation, a number of internal reflection sessions and reviews and sharing lessons learned internally among the staff. And it also included significant engagement with external partners and stakeholders. And we spoke to a fairly wide cross-section of people individually and in our Blue Accounting circle to get feedback on what was working with our current approach and what we could improve. And the Legislative Caucus and your members were a key part of the stakeholder interview and engagement process. And so we really want to recognize and thank you for your participation and valuable feedback, because it has been reflected in where we're going in the future. And hopefully you can see that as we walk through our presentation today. Next slide. So following that sort of phase of reflection and feedback, we summarized what we learned in some key areas as key successes that we want to make sure provided the foundation for going forward. So in addition to those successes, we also learned there were some things that we could do to help take this effort to the next level. One of the ways we feel like we were successful was establishing our 5 collaborative work groups that supported the different pilot issues under Blue Accounting. So that included our nutrient reduction Erie Stat work group, our aquatic invasive species work group, our source water, soon to be drinking water work group, maritime transportation, and coastal wetlands. And those work groups included state, provincial, stakeholder representation, as well as federal and other non-government entities. And those work groups really helped us engage with our partners, understand, and give us some key insights on how we could take the concepts of Blue Accounting and make them a reality. And so as part of those relationships that we built in this pilot phase, we those partners and work group members also started to see the value in the process and started to become invested in how this effort could actually benefit them in their work. And so as we worked with those work groups, there became a greater clarity on what Blue accounting was intended to be and what it actually could be through the work of these pilot issues. And so that helped us create an increasing demand for Blue accounting. So people started to see, like I said, the value and the opportunity that this kind of initiative presents. The other thing that we know and we learned is that Blue accounting was a bold approach from the start. What it would look like to use data and information to really assess our progress on regional goals in order to inform future investments and decision making. So people really appreciated that bold approach, and they recognize that while it's exciting, it's also challenging and important. And actually through our engagement process, we were encouraged by some folks we spoke to consider being even braver and bolder in our work. With the idea that we need to do that and be a little bit more bold and brave in order to really drive the changes that we wanted to see in decision-making and investments through the work of Blue accounting. So next slide, please. So after careful consideration of all the feedback we received, we established a focused approach for the initiative, which we hope provides the solid and clear foundation for our work going forward. Because we had a lot of questions at the beginning about what is Blue accounting, who is it for, what are we doing? So this pilot phase work and the reflection led us to distill down Blue accounting into these key elements that you see on the slide here. And the one thing I want to focus on specifically here is our target audience. So again, one of the repeated questions was, who are we building this for? And we had a general notion of Great Lakes decision makers for who we wanted to target with Blue accounting, but we realized we needed to really get more specific and target at least the first level and tier of information that we provide through Blue accounting to folks with the ability to make decisions about policies and investments in the region. And so that is those elected and appointed officials that sit within government bodies at multiple levels. So the Legislative Caucus is clearly one of those groups that we want to target with our service. And hopefully what you see starts to make sense and give you the information that you're looking for to help you do your work going forward. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nicole so she can show you what that looks like and give you a picture into where we're headed.
All right, thanks, Erica. I think I'm set on the technical side. My screens are a little wonky on me today. So Erica shared sort of where we've been, and now I am the lucky individual that gets to share with you a little bit on where we're going. As Erica mentioned, during our pilot, we tried a lot of things, we worked with a lot of people, and we learned a lot. And so what I'm excited to share with you today is the vision of where we're headed. We're currently in the midst of building a brand new website. Our hope when we scheduled this with Carolyn was that I'd be able to actually take you into the site today, but we're not quite where I want us to be yet, but I think that the content we have to show you today will actually be really helpful for where we are in this moment. So we think through a lot of those discussions and the pie chart that Erica showed in her portion of the slide deck, we've gotten a lot of feedback on what it is that leaders in your positions actually need from Blue accounting. And that will go directly to that concept of being brave. I think during the pilot, we made some excellent headway in building relationships and acquiring data and understanding what it meant for the health of the Great Lakes. But getting to that next phase of really distilling it down to really what does it mean when those of you are making legislative decisions, that's where we're headed. And so I'm excited to show you where we're going. So first up, our new homepage. And I know that these images that we've put into the slide deck are probably going to seem a little small for you. I believe Laura has shared in the chat the deck itself, so you'll be able to open them up at your leisure and take a closer look. But we've decided to go ahead with this map-based navigation at the top of the page. And so you can see the sort of dark waters of the Great Lakes with your jurisdictions and all of the lakes demarcated. We're still doing a little bit of work on this map, but the navigation will still be heavily map-based. One of the things that we learned early on in the pilot, thanks to our former colleague, Lisa Hanairo, was that those of you in legislative offices really do need to know what's happening in your jurisdiction. So to bring you to the information with what's happening in Wisconsin, what's happening in Indiana, very quickly was one of our top priorities in redesigning the site. The other thing you can see on the bottom half of this image is our issue, our topic-based navigation. So we also recognize that there's some things where there's a very specific issue you're interested in and you just want to dive in and see what's going on. And so we also have navigation where you'll be able to look through our issues that we're presenting on Blue Accounting and hopefully find what you need. And of course, you know me, so if you don't find what you need, I know all of you can get in touch and let us know what you think. The two issues that we'll be going forward with the new site first will be our aquatic invasive species issue that you see highlighted here, and also the Erie Stat or Lake Erie phosphorus control work that I've been leading during the pilot phase. We're mindful that as we're rebuilding the site, we want to make sure that we're getting it right for all of you. And so we're going to start a little bit slow and walk before we run, as the saying goes, so that we can make sure that we've got all the kinks worked out on the new site and that we're really delivering the information that you're looking for. So from that new homepage, from the map, you're going to get these progress pages. This is the challenging part. This is the part that's really taking that bravery and courage that Erica mentioned. Erica and I are working with our Erie Stat and AIS teams to really figure out how to use this iconography. When you click from your jurisdiction or you click from a lake basin, you'll be able to get into these progress pages. And I'm going to do a closer look for you so you can see these gauges that we've landed on. We're not 100% there with this red, yellow, green approach. Our take is that it's very intuitive. Most people do recognize that stoplight color scheme, but we do need to work through that with our work groups because, as you might imagine, nobody wants to see themselves in the red. So wherever we land with that icon, you will have this type of gauge that will be available by issue, by goal that we are trying to achieve for Great Lakes issues, and then also by the metrics that we're using to measure progress. So this example that you see here does go to the work that we're doing around Lake Erie. I do want to say this is mocked up by our website designers. So please, especially for those of you that are in Ohio, Ohio has been our example as we've worked through this because we do have so much data on Lake Erie. These numbers are completely made up. We are not seeing a 60% reduction in phosphorus in the Portage River. I wish that were true. Still working with our colleagues to do those calculations and be able to populate the new site with the real data. So this is really just a visual to show what you will be able to engage with in the new Blue Accounting website. A couple important key features. We will have on these pages the opportunity to dig in a little deeper and understand how we're using those progress icons. How is the dial, the needle on the dial actually being set? And that will vary across Blue Accounting issues. It will vary even within the metrics that we're presenting because we need to be mindful that one of the reasons this work hasn't been done before is that there's so much context around everything we look at involving the Great Lakes. There's so much nuance to a lot of our policies and approaches that we need to make sure we have that flexibility so that our colleagues that we're working with in the state and provincial agencies, in the federal agencies, even within local government, are comfortable with what we're putting up and we're transparent with how we're actually assessing progress. The other piece I want to share with you actually goes into the navigation for the site quite a bit. And that's that for each of these metrics that you can explore and see the gauge for on the progress page, you can dig deeper in those specific metrics and really engage with the data, see what the outcomes are for the data that is available for these specific metrics. And you can also then look at related programs. And that's where I think we're really starting to evolve the new Blue Accounting into something that will hopefully be really, really helpful to all of you legislatively, where you'll be able to see some of the good things that are happening maybe in your neighboring jurisdictions. Maybe you'll see where your jurisdiction isn't doing what its neighbors are doing and can glean some ideas on how to fill some of those gaps. We've got some different approaches that I'll share with you today on what that would look like. And then we also really see this as an opportunity to continue to collaborate with the caucus as you do your focused work, like you're doing with the Nutrient Task Force, to be able to create a home within Blue Accounting to see how things are going as you land on your policy recommendations. So moving along to that metrics page, when you click to learn more about what's happening with where the needle is on those gauges, you'll get into a metrics page that's really constructed into 3 key parts: an overview about the metric, an exploration or explore tab that allows you to interact with the data that we are visualizing on the site, and then that compare feature to see really what are the programs and policies that relate to all of this data. One of the other tricky parts that we run into is that oftentimes there's not a direct causal relationship between some of these programs and the data. They touch it, right? But they don't necessarily have a direct one-to-one link. And so we'll be very careful as we put information on the site to make sure that that is explained so that you have good, credible information on how all of these puzzle pieces fit together. The navigation on the left-hand side of this image that I'm sharing is important. So as we're in one of these issue pages, the Lake Erie work really revolves around one goal that you can see at the top: reducing phosphorus loads to the lake by 40%. Other issues may have multiple goals, and so you'll have the opportunity to navigate through those goals as you interact with the new site. But a really key feature for us is that you can navigate by metric, but you can also connect related metrics. The example that we have here on this mock-up from our website designer specifically recognizes that when we're talking about nutrients in Lake Erie phosphorus, we're also talking about drinking water, and there will be some related metrics as we relaunch our drinking water issue this summer, where we can start to connect some of those pieces and see, well, how does this phosphorus control effort actually affect what's going on with drinking water around Lake Erie and even beyond in the entire Great Lakes Basin? Another related metric is restoration of wetlands. The Nutrient Task Force has talked about that a bit and has learned some things in your recent webinar from Scudder Mackey at Ohio DNR with what Ohio is doing with wetland restoration to control phosphorus in Lake Erie. We'll be able to connect that. It's not directly in the Erie Stat issue, but making those linkages is going to be really critically important because a lot of these issues don't stand on their own, they interconnect. We'll also have a feature toward the bottom where more information will give us an area where some of the really fantastic work that in particular federal agencies are doing, building maps, creating monitoring systems, they're hard to find. If any of you have tried to dig into some of those federal websites and find something specific you're looking for, we're going to use Blue Accounting to try to curate that a little bit with our partners so that if there's more information coming through from some of our partners, we'll be able to promote it and connect it to this work on Blue Accounting. So a little bit more conceptually on what this looks like. Blue Accounting is really a goal-driven information system. Whether goals are established through the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that we work with for the Lake Erie work or through other avenues, everything we're putting up on Blue Accounting needs to relate to a goal that's been established for some key Great Lakes issue. From those goals, we then start to measure progress using metrics. This example is from our maritime transportation pilot issue. So you can see in this conceptual model of the new website navigation, those tabs that I showed you. We'll have an overview to share. What's the metric really about? Why does it matter? Why does it relate to the goal? The explore piece that will share those data visualizations, allow you to poke around in the data through some maps, through some charts. Ideally, that will be information that's presented against a target. In the next couple slides, I'll show you why those targets really start to matter in terms of understanding progress. And then that last piece is the tricky compare part, right? What are other jurisdictions doing related to these metrics or goals to really try to move the needle on the gauge? So looking at the explore feature first, how you can engage with data on the site. And I think most of these examples I'm going to share with you are at blueaccounting.org right now. But again, the website is being replaced. That's what I'm sharing with you today. So we'll be taking these good components of those first 2 pilot issues and moving them over. We don't want to lose track of our work for maritime and its importance to the Great Lakes economy. So we do see the maritime issue coming back down the road. But again, to my point of walking before we run, we want to make sure that the website is doing everything we need it to do collectively as a Great Lakes community before we start adding new issues. So this is a really fun chart on the website because it's active. You can turn off each of these commodity categories that are the colors in this stacked bar graph. But what you'll notice with this maybe is that we don't have a target. And if we had a target, you'd be able to see a little bit better, how are we doing? Is there something we're trying to achieve collectively regarding tonnage handled by our maritime transportation system? Erica Jensen's team doing our AIS issue has a great example that uses a bright red target line in the AIS space, looking at fish species that are regulated as invasive so that we know jurisdictions have taken some action to say, you aren't supposed to have these fish in trade, right? And so the bright red target line here, I feel, is very impactful. You can come in and you can see a number of jurisdictions that are regulating these species. If we move over into what you can engage with through the compare tab for each metric, this visual here again is mocked up by our website designer, so it's not something that cohesively makes sense. It's just to get the architecture of the site together. We will be presenting these tabular views. When we were doing our interviews last summer and engaging with a number of you, this became known as our fish chart that people really, really liked. We found in particular in the legislative space, this was very popular. What they are building for us for the website when it is ready is that you'd be able to click the icon in the box, whether it's a fish, a water drop, whatever's appropriate for the issue or metric you're looking at, and we'll be able to dig a little bit deeper. So as we've been sharing with some of our jurisdictional colleagues, Great Lakes issues are too complicated to just represent them by a fish in a box, right? So we want to make sure that while this might be the first view of what's happening at the highest level across some of these metrics, that there's opportunities to learn more and understand what's happening rather than jumping to too quick conclusions. So this will be one opportunity for us to be able to compare across metrics within our Blue accounting issues. A couple other options. This is taken from the existing Blue accounting site where we're able to filter pieces of content. So you can come in at the top, you see filter by activity or jurisdiction. So if there's something specific that you're looking for or a specific jurisdiction that you want to take a look at, what are they doing to approach some of these different activities, in this instance around phosphorus control, you'll be able to find that content and get summaries that we work with our colleagues in the jurisdictions to prepare that share what's happening with these programs and policies, and we'll be attempting to update those annually so that we can keep everything on the site up to speed with what's happening in the jurisdictions. And then the last option for compare is again from our AIS issue. I believe this is not up on the site right now. We have evolved past it into a different data visualization, but I really like it because the use of color here helps to show how many program components the different jurisdictions have when it comes to making sure that our beloved recreational boats that we love so much around the Great Lakes are not creating a hazard when it comes to transporting invasive species. There's a number of programmatic approaches that jurisdictions take to try to control the spread of invasive species through that recreational boating pathway. And this helps to keep track of what's happening around that space. So this is our third option that we could use, a color-coded map to be able to, again, in a very high-level way, share what's happening and then provide opportunities for users of the website to dig a little bit deeper and understand what's happening. I added a couple slides to this deck specific to Lake Erie. I know I was able to join your last webinar in this series, and there was a question, I believe, on how things were going around Lake Erie. So this is one of our existing graphs that's up on the site. The problem I've got is that they're too hard to find on the current site. And so the new site If we do things right, we'll make this much easier to engage with this data and see how things are going. In addition, those gauges will be able to mark out if we're thinking about reducing phosphorus by 40%, where are we? What's the number when we start looking at this? So this first graph, I've got two that I'll share with you today, does have a target line, so that's handy, right? This target comes from the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement and the specific 40% reduction targets for Lake Erie. It is 6,000 is our number for metric tons of phosphorus that we're trying to achieve or go below for the Western and Central Lake Erie basins. The Lake Erie issue gets a little bit more complicated than some people initially understand, in that there are not yet targets for the Eastern basin of the lake. The Eastern basin, which of course would affect those of you that are on from Ontario, New York, and Pennsylvania, suffers more from a type of algae called Cladophora that washes up on beaches. It's the sort of stringy stuff that you see and people have to rake off their beaches, or beach muck is sometimes how it's framed locally. So no targets there yet. So when we think about measuring against this 6,000 metric ton target, we're only looking at the Western basin that's affected by algal blooms and the Central basin that has the dead zones or hypoxic conditions. Now, the interesting thing, if we think way back to our pre-COVID lives in 2019, that's this bar here. You may recall it was a tremendously wet spring. 2019, it would not stop raining. Those of you that work in agriculture probably recall you couldn't get out and get your crops in. Not a good example. So this is one of our outlier years. One of the challenges that we have with Lake Erie phosphorus certainly is that it is driven by wet weather. And we know that we've seen a lot of fluctuation in recent years with high intensity storm events, and that's making it very challenging for jurisdictions to be able to reduce phosphorus loads to the lake. So here's one example of how things are going from the big lake perspective in those basin-wide views. The other option that you have for Lake Erie specifically within blue accounting, but I think we'll see more and more of this as we start adding issues to the site, is to look by tributary. I've used the River Raisin watershed in Michigan as our example here. Again, this is a product that's up on blue accounting right now, but it's a little too hard to find. So we're moving it in the new site to make it more accessible. And also, again, attaching those gauges, whether they are red, yellow, green, or some other color scheme, so that we can see that dial and look numerically to see how are we doing toward those 40% reduction goals. Here again, bright red target line, you can see that in the Raisin, they were doing actually really well from 2012 to 2016 or so. What's interesting, as I understand it, is that around 2016, there were a number of contracts for producers to have conservation practices installed that expired. And when they expired and those incentives were not there anymore, we saw some of those good conservation activities come out in the watershed. And so that is the hypothesis at this point with why there's such a significant jump from 2016 to 2017, that isn't just more wet weather. The sort of turquoise line that you see on top of those bars is actually flow through the system. So you can see that there is a definite connection to phosphorus loads, the blue bars, and how much rain is falling on those watersheds. So just a little bit of a segue to give you a deeper illustration of the type of information you can find in blue accounting that's been developed both through our pilot and will continue to be available in hopefully a more accessible way as the new site becomes ready. So where are we headed? Since the new year, we have been redesigning the platform. Again, it's very close. I had an inkling of maybe showing it to you today, but I think I just want to polish it a little bit more before we start sharing it with people. Our first issues, as I mentioned, will be our Lake Erie Stat phosphorus work and the AIS issue. Over the pilot phase, they tended to mature and have the most robust group of people working around those and had the most content on the existing site. So we're going to work on migrating that over. And we're doing that now. We've got our hands in the site now. It's been kind of exciting. And then as we get deeper into the summer, we're going to get started. Erica mentioned that one of our pilot issues involved sources of drinking water. We've expanded that to be a broader drinking water issue. At the outset for the pilot phase, as we were just trying to see how blue accounting might work, it made sense to be narrow, right? All drinking water comes from a source. So as we dug deeper into it though, what we were hearing from people, including some of you, was, you know, gosh, what's going on with lead in drinking water in the distribution systems? What's going on with PFAS? It seems like it's everywhere, and states and the provinces are being left to themselves to figure out how to manage it. We realized there were other things we needed to talk about. A lot of discussion going on about the affordability of water and access to water. And so the broader drinking water issue is going to tackle those things. I realize the word launch here can be used in multiple ways, right? So we will not have the drinking water work launched on the new website in July, but what we are doing is launching a new work group, and that is forming now. So those groups will be coming together to help us look at how do we bring some of that source water work over? How do we look at treatment in terms of what are the treatment needs around the basin, whether you're thinking about algal blooms and toxins like microcystin, or whether we're thinking about how to handle the PFAS problem as it continues to emerge. Distribution, we know that a previous GLLC task force did outstanding work on lead in drinking water, and we see a real opportunity to be able to perhaps visualize and track progress for the caucus on how those efforts are going. Same thing with the policy recommendations related to nutrients. So good stuff on the horizon there. I would encourage any of you that yourselves, or you may have staff that might want to actually participate with us in that drinking water issue, please do reach out. I'll be working on it from a little bit from arm's length. We have a very talented project manager on our staff named Margot Davis that is going to lead this for us. And I think Margot would really love to have some legislative presence on some of these groups so that we can make sure, as we're building out that issue and providing information that I believe is probably very much of interest to all of you, that we're getting it right. Second bullet in that middle square is fundraising. Not surprisingly, organizing all of this information, engaging with all of these people, and dealing with the many, many personalities that are involved when we start talking about this type of work takes a lot of time, and it does take some money. So we're in the midst of looking at our fundraising opportunities. Certainly want to have conversations with how we keep blue accounting going into the future. Certainly the new website, I hope, is going to show what blue accounting can be. I think through the pilot, I'm very proud of the work that we did. We didn't get as far as we wanted to go, but we're headed there now. And I think that that will hopefully allow people to really see what it is and how impactful it could be if we're able to keep this cohesive community of interested Great Lakes leaders and practitioners together as we build out the new site. And then as we head into 2022, we're going to continue phasing in other issues, both ones that we've already worked on. I shared with you some things from our maritime transportation issue. We also have an existing issue on coastal wetlands. Our commissioners, like the caucus, have been very, very interested in this concept of resiliency. GLC has been looking at it from a climate resiliency lens. I know others focus more on coastal resiliency, but however you slice that, a lot of it does come together in a way that we see real opportunities through blue accounting to be able to share what's going on in that realm as well. And then finally, to what Erica had shared to bring us full circle, GLC has really taken the reins of blue accounting, and we're integrating this into all of our work. Certainly for me, it's become other duties as assigned, right? Where I'm not just doing all of our water stuff, but helping with this as well. We're really trying to strengthen our organizational structure so that blue accounting can really be a long-term information service that's available to all of you. So with that, I think we have plenty of time today for a discussion, which is what we were hoping to have. My colleague, Eric Brown, I think is going to help lead us through any questions that you have. I am chuckling a little bit. I don't know if Senator Vanderwall is on, but I think this picture might have been taken in his district. We use it a lot because we love this, group of people that are collaborating and talking. on the shore of Lake Michigan, but I think we lost our location and photo credit somewhere along the way, but I think it might be Benzie County. So Senator Jacques, I'll hand it back to you and my colleague Eric Brown.
Excellent. Well, I'll just jump in with a question. So I guess my first question would be, is there any sort of a segmentation for any sort of investments, say for instance, wetland mitigation for parts of states or provinces that fall in versus outside of the Great Lakes watershed? Say, Wisconsin, Minnesota, how is that information or how would you like it to be reported to the Great Lakes Commission so that, certainly you have larger programs like H2 Ohio that, are focused statewide, but obviously are able to, help with certain things just based on where those investments fall within the watershed. So I guess that would be my first question. And, I guess the main question is, how can we help? How can...
Uh-oh, we've lost his audio.
Either formally or informally. Yeah, I'll let you respond to the first one.
We lost you there for a moment, Senator Jacques. So I think one of the difficulties we run into as Great Lakes Commission staff, right, is that there is a hydrologic boundary. We see it on a lot of our maps and the iteration of the map we'll use for blue accounting. The reality is, except for Michigan, which is predominantly entirely in the Great Lakes Basin, we have portions of your jurisdictions that are in the basin. And there will be times in blue accounting when, because of what we're looking at, there isn't a demarcation. There's simply a policy. I'll use Erica's work as an example, and then she can chime in if I get it wrong. But the aquatic invasive species policies around the jurisdictions tend to apply to the entire jurisdiction, right? They don't have a break point that changes things when you step over that hydrologic boundary for the Great Lakes Basin. So, but then on the flip side, we have very heavily watershed-based work around Lake Erie that has colleagues in Ohio certainly are looking at things like H2 Ohio and specific efforts that go toward that in-basin footprint. And so I think it's going to be a little bit of a mixed bag. What I'm really curious about, and this is why I think having some legislative perspective on the drinking water work group as it starts to form to get that content ready to go on the site, is what do we do with drinking water? Because I think that's going to be a lot like what we see with the aquatic invasive species work, where regulations or policies attempting to, for example, create standards for lead in drinking water and when do lines need to be replaced, and all of that work that your colleagues did through the task force on lead, aren't going to have a Great Lakes kind of focus. But the footprint then could expand for us in a way that would feel very strange. I'll use Pennsylvania for an example. I never work with anybody in Philadelphia on stuff. And so we'll need to get some understanding, I think, through our audience for blue accounting, then certainly guidance from Great Lakes commissioners, right? So those of us that are talking with you today, we're the staff of the Great Lakes Commission, but we ultimately report to our commissioners. And certainly some of you as office holders are also Great Lakes commissioners. So there's good opportunities to talk through how to do that. And then your second question, Senator Jacques.
Well, and at this point, I think actually I do have additional questions, but I see we have a hand raised by Todd Brennan, and he also had a question in the chat. So if we maybe allow Todd to unmute his line and to ask his question at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Jacques. I appreciate that, and for what you're doing with the nutrients team and all the work you're doing. So I appreciate. Nicole, I just want to say thank you. This is really great to see. I know there's been a lot of work that has gone into this to lead up to this point, and the revamp, I think it looks great. And I found the tools that you put up helpful as I try to garner information to present to folks and decision makers and agency staff, and it's been helpful. And so, yeah, that's great to see. One question I had was if you thought about integrating other, I guess other, I don't know what to call it, other tools, indicators, et cetera. Like I think NOAA is the one that creates the HAB severity index. And so that's really helpful to look at every year, and wondering if that's just something you could duplicate or link to that. And I don't know if that ties to this next question, but the second part would be, you know, the Annex 4 team outlined trying to meet favorable cyanobacteria conditions in the Western Lake Erie Basin in 9 out of 10 years. And so it'd be great to figure out a way that we could see that, what that means, because there hasn't been much discussion on it, and that's obviously trying to achieve a condition sustainably over time is you know, one of the goals, in addition to just loads and concentrations. But so just curious your thoughts on those two things.
So you're giving me a great example. It's good to see you, Todd, by the way. You're giving me a great example of why we needed a new website, because the bloom severity work is actually on the existing Erie Stat portion of Blue Accounting. We have been collaborating with NOAA through their position on the Annex 4 subcommittee under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and have now for a few years had the bloom severity index up. And it was actually through Blue Accounting's work that we actually pinned down what that target number is. It's 2.9 under the index that we're trying to meet, and had some rather amusing conversations with people going, well, wait, what's the number? And so pointing to just, you know, 2012, we needed to do a little bit better than that. So it's been really interesting for me, and the Great Lakes Commission sits as an extended subcommittee member to the Annex 4 work, is that the need and the interest that we've seen for Blue Accounting has actually really pushed people to pause and say, you know what, we actually need to answer this. And one of the most gratifying Blue Accounting moments that I had was at one of those annex meetings a couple of years ago now. I mean, these are complex issues, so we're still working on it. Was a colleague from NOAA pointing out that Blue Accounting was pushing them to, specific to Lake Erie hypoxia, recognize that you set a target, we now need to know how you're going to measure it. And from there, how are we actually going to share what's being measured and how we're doing? And that's that next phase of Blue Accounting that I'm so excited, even though it's also a little bit terrifying to have to bring our partners together and say, hey, we've got a page now with a gauge. What's the number? And we'll see. It's going to be a very interesting summer as we work with our groups to figure out what we can do and how brave can we get them to be as we push that new content onto the site.
Thank you, Nicole and Erica. You know, I actually have to apologize because I just was so excited. I wanted to jump right into questions, and I didn't thank you for really an outstanding presentation.
We're
And this
losing
is a
your audio
tremendously
still a little bit.
Senator Jock, I think we're having problems with your internet. Thankfully, we know what you're saying, but I think we're having problems with your internet.
So I guess my point was just that not only can we reflect on the value and the relative value of existing investments, but also informing legislation from the ground up. And I guess I'm just looking for any ways that as a caucus we can help to formalize or informally have agreements and at your disposal that you need to have this tool be as valuable as possible for comparisons, and for us as policymakers to look at the relative gains that we've been able to make with different types of investments.
Yes, thank you for that offer. And I would say, you know, as we go forward in moving content over the new platform, sort of a near-term thing that would be helpful is if there are members of your caucus or your caucus member staff that would be willing to work with us to, test the demonstration site before we go live and give us some feedback to make sure we we've got it right this time, and that it is, we are providing that easy to understand information that you and your staff need to inform the work that you're doing. And that's certainly a near-term thing that would be helpful. One of the things I don't know that we've touched on too much yet this morning is Nicole mentioned, once we migrate over our 2 Erie Stat and AIS issues, we're going to then start to phase in other issues, including some of the other existing work. But I know Eric Brown on our staff has already started working with the Legislative Caucus on the new Climate Task Force and Berkholz Institute effort. And we're looking at how to integrate our climate resiliency efforts into Blue Accounting. So I would certainly see an opportunity there to help inform that process through that effort. And Nicole and Eric can jump in here at any time. But I think ongoing conversations like this to keep the Legislative Caucus up to speed on the development, provide you opportunities to help tell us if the information that we're providing actually gets you, like I said, the information you need is always valuable. And then as we start to define some of these maybe new metrics or need to get new information, if there are opportunities, like you said, to set up some maybe more formal agreements or detail out some specific information that this group could provide, we can certainly continue to have those conversations and define what that looks like.
Thank you. And that I was just kind of ask if there were checklists of information or tables that you're potentially looking to use, but you need to have that fuller picture. I just think we have a lot of members of the caucus that are more than willing.
Yes, certainly. And so we have
Appreciate
some of
that.
our
Thank
work
you.
groups, but we're going to be, building out additional metrics. And so where we want some of this policy and strategy and approach information, yes, bringing in the expertise from this group would be helpful. Eric, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, if I could just add something to that, and I agree with everything Erica just said, and also appreciate all of you in your continuing partnership with us as we, continue on this effort for Blue Accounting. I know that, one of the things that we heard from members of the Legislative Caucus throughout our surveys and workshops that we did over the last year or so is that you all want to know what policies are working, how well they're working, and really measure your success and be able to replicate the success that's occurring in other jurisdictions. So Erica and Nicole also talked about the relative bravery that sort of that requires to really measure how we are doing. So I guess just as a broad cultural thing here in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence region, if you all are encouraging your peers in both the legislative and executive branches to be brave and sort of walk down this path together, I think this is a tool that can help us inform the entire process from policy development to policy implementation to make sure the stuff that you all are working on it is done well and that we're achieving the goals that you all set forth. So I think just from a really broad standpoint, encouraging your partners throughout government to really get on board with measuring success will be huge.
Nicole and Eric, we are having a task force meeting on June 4th. I'll make sure you all get an invite to it. We're going to plan what the task force is going to be doing over the summer and the fall. So you might want to join, one of you might want to join us and see if there's some areas, particularly if we talk about having an in-person meeting, et cetera, that you might want to be involved with.
That would be great.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Any additional questions from anybody that we have with us in the webinar today? Don't be shy. I've been talking too much already. Todd, go ahead.
Yeah, I followed your lead, Senator Jacques, that I talked too much, so, but nobody else was jumping up, so we help those who help themselves. I was curious, you showed an image, I think it was during Nicole's presentation, maybe Erica's, and now I can't recall, it was sort of a state one-pager kind of image, and it sounded like it could be, you could get there via the lake basin or via the state, or you could see the lake basin and then click on each state. And so I was just curious for example, you showed us, I think, Ohio, but what would Wisconsin look like, for example? Would it show the Green Bay area? Would it reference local targets that we've been setting for Green Bay or TMDL, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question, Todd. And I think, yes, I think our hosts have us back to the slide that we're talking about. So the Ohio example page is one of which we will have all 10 jurisdictions will have a page. Depending on how deeply they touch the issues as we're going forward, obviously Wisconsin is not working with us on the Lake Erie stuff. And so we won't have Lake Erie phosphorus work up on Wisconsin's example progress page right now, but there would be information on aquatic invasive species. The good thing with us going forward with these two issues is that Erica's AIS work does span the entirety of the basin, whereas the Erie Stat work gives us an example of what that lake basin plus state progress views start to look like. As we bring more issues back on, certainly once the drinking water work gets up and running, I would expect that we would start to see information for our sources of drinking water work. We already have a pretty neat nutrient tracking tool that's up on the existing site that again needs to be put in a way where people can engage with it more readily. That's where I think we would start to see some of those nutrient control efforts, and could include the Green Bay area. I know we've had lots of conversations with partners in Wisconsin and some of our commissioners about the potential utility of blue accounting when you think about things like the Fox River TMDL, and could it be useful in that way? And so I am hopeful that as we get the new site set and people see the potential of where we're going, that we can have deeper discussions on what that looks like and how those specific local interests can fit within this broader view of blue accounting.
Appreciate. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say thank you. That helps to know, and it just reminds me that maybe we should follow up and have a conversation. And same to you, Senator Jacques. That we've got a large-scale planning effort that we're co-leading with Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance and the DNR, and we've set our own targets for the phosphorus reduction levels. And so, it's probably high time that we link up with you both and talk about that and how we can have that maybe reflected in blue accounting.
Yeah, so I also want to point out, go ahead, Senator Jacques.
Oh, I was just going to say, I appreciate that, Todd, because that's just what I was going to get into as far as there was legislation that I know the Great Lakes Commission had a chance to take a look at, establishing an Office of Water Quality is one of our Clean Water Task Force bills last session, passed one chamber, not the other, but kind of formalized a little bit that role of coordinating with blue accounting through the Great Lakes Commission, but also kind of having that public dashboard available in terms of water quality in individual water bodies, and the sort of thing that could incorporate having that dashboard for Wisconsin, but also something that could be referenced through blue accounting, but also making sure that we are allowing for that kind of basin-wide comparison that's really important in terms of the information that blue accounting is trying to collate. So sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Well, what I neglected to point out to all of you, so I'm really glad we came back to this slide, is at the bottom of these progress pages, we're creating space for state or provincial specific information. Our website designers are doing two options for us. The first is to simply replicate the structure that we use for blue accounting shared goals and metrics. So if there is something state specific, to Todd's point about the work happening around the Fox, and that specific goal that's been set for your nutrient reductions that isn't necessarily statewide or part of a shared effort, there would be space on Wisconsin's page to potentially put that up, either using that same gauge that would track progress, or would also have an alternative that will just open it up, so that if our board members and commissioners for jurisdictions want to work with their colleagues to say, okay, what should we say here? And it may be identifying things like capacity needs, right? It could be that maybe a jurisdiction isn't doing very well with some of those shared goals and metrics, but it provides an opportunity to say, hey, we could do better, but we have 2 people running this program in our agency, and what we actually need are 5. So I think that space will hopefully be really helpful. How we use it, again, is going to be something we'll need to do a lot of thinking and talking about this summer, and then probably evolve over time.
Yeah, great. This is great from both of you. Thanks. I'll reach out at some point. And Senator Jacques, I remember you including the reference to blue accounting and the Office of Water Quality or policy in the Water Quality Task Force. So yeah, whatever support we can offer to get some of those things reintroduced, you know, I'm all for it. So I'll reach out as well, if you don't mind, and we'll touch base.
Please do. Thank you. All right. Additional questions?
I think we'll be able to give people some time back, Senator.
Very good. Well, appreciate everybody participating today. I guess, yeah, we'll let people get on with their Friday and then hopefully their weekend. So I guess in closing, I just would like to thank our sponsors again, the Joyce Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. We really appreciate the support that we have consistently gotten from these 3 foundations for a long period of time now, and their recognition that state and provincial legislators are vital stakeholders to engage in the policy-making process in the Great Lakes region. Again, would like to thank Nicole, Erica, Eric from the Great Lakes Commission. Just thank everybody who's participated, and you know, again, we'll have more wonderful things to share in the near future with Blue Accounting, and feel free to share this webinar presentation, which will be up on the website. And I think that's all that we have for today, but just want to again say thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you again for inviting us. We look forward to continuing this work with you all.
Did I miss anything, Karen?